Hi, everyone, and welcome to the module where we're going to start to kind of wrap things up and tie things together. So one of the things that I want to make sure you guys have an understanding about is self-determination and why it's important. So the purpose of this lecture is to first define self-determination. What is it? Describe why it's important, understand the components of self-determination, and provide some examples on how you can support your students. So why does this matter? So self-determination is important because it helps individuals be able to make their own choices about what they want to do in life. So this leads to improved adult outcomes, employment, living situations, relationships. It leads to a life that they actually feel they want instead of what other people want. So they're making decisions based on that. And then improved positive school experiences, so higher grades, attendance, and improved behavior. And I'll kind of, as we talk about self-determination, I think you'll get a better idea on how working on self-determination skills and all the different parts of self-determination can help lead to both improved adult and school outcomes. So what are the components of self-determination? So, I've done a lot of research studies, and this is a term that's often misunderstood because there's so many components of it. So here on the screen here are several of the components that go into self-determination. In a nutshell, it is an individual, making sure that an individual it's a causal agent in their own life. So they're making their own decisions. They're not doing what others want to do, but they're doing what they want to do. What the pieces that go into that are choice making, problem solving, decision making, goal making, goal setting and attainment, self-regulation, self-awareness, self-efficacy, and self-advocacy. So you can see how there might be some confusion because a lot of these terms can be used incorrectly or interchanged. A lot of times people think that self-advocacy and self-determination are the same thing. They help, they're different, but they're similar. So first off, choice making. So that's choosing between a set of numbered choices. So this is something that I've done some research in, even at a young age. So even like those toddler years, you can give children choices. And like, for instance, do you want to wear which outfit do you want to wear today? Things like that. But one of the things that is important to understand that choice making is a little bit complex as well, because a lot of times, and I know I have done this in the past as a new parent, that it's easy to give choices, but they're not really choices. So, saying, do you want broccoli or cauliflower? Maybe those aren't choices. Maybe that's not giving them enough choices to be able to really understand kind of what their wants and needs are. So just making sure that you're giving them the appropriate choices so that it actually is a choice. A lot of times, as a parent, you just want to get out the door in the morning, for instance, and so it's easy to sometimes put choices out there for, like, I know I've done it where I put choices out there for my kids, but they're not really choices because they're really what I want, not necessarily what my kids want. Problem solving. So that's weighing the pros and cons of your actions, looking at like what are barriers, what are options for overcoming those barriers, and just coming up with the strategies in order to that are going to help you be able to make those choices. Because sometimes it's not cut and dry. Like, what do I want? Sometimes, like, I know as an adult, I don't always know. So those problem solving skills are really important. Decision making is choosing between unlimited options. So a few slides ago I was talking about the choice making and how it's important to have enough choices and make sure that they are actual choices. But this is like, how do you make a decision when everything is unlimited? There's all these options, and so really just it ties into that problem solving, decision making, all these things tie together. Goal setting and attainment. So not only when we talk about IEP meetings, we talk about goals for that year, but also just really looking at like, what do I want to do? Like, do I want to go to college? Do I want to do I want to get married? All those different pieces of it. What does success look for me? and what do I want, both short term and long term. Not what my parents want, but what do I want? And then once you figure that out, and that one of the things I'll talk about a little bit later is person-centered planning. So really understanding, what does the student want, and then coming up with these actionable and achievable steps in order for them to reach their goals. Self-regulation, so controlling their own behavior and monitoring their own actions. So being able to self-monitor, self-evaluate, and self-manage in order to be able to be successful in some of these other areas of self-determination. Self-awareness is, awareness of your own strengths, individuality, and areas for improvement. So I've seen, for instance, a lot of this is also just being aware of your own what your disabilities and your strengths are. And so, like, for instance, with hearing loss, if someone asks you a question, to be able to say, oh yeah, this is the hearing aid, it helps me hear, and yes, I'm deaf, and be able to explain that to someone, and in a way that is positive and would make sense to the other person. Self-advocacy. So I know you guys have probably heard about this particular word and thought about how you might implement this in the classroom. So this is advocating, like, for instance, for your students' accommodations, modifications, understanding what their students' rights are, communicating that, coming to an IEP meeting and saying, gosh, like, I feel like I need more support in these areas. So, or, something I just don't understand something in the classroom, I'm going to need some extra help in order to be able to access the curriculum. So, it's really just important to, make sure that you're giving the students like those skills in order to be able to do that on their own. Self-efficacy is awareness that your actions have an impact on other people and that you're a change agent in your own life. So, for instance, just making sure that, like, you understand that there's other people around you. And sometimes it's really difficult for students with disabilities because they may not understand the social cues and things like that, and understand how their actions impact others. And, really being that change, and also teaching them to be a change agent in their own lives. So how do we support students to be able to do this? So it's this circle of, first you have to plan, teach and support, and then assess how things are going, and then continuously, it's a continuous loop. So, and I would also say that as I've thought about this and talked with both families and teachers, is that it's really important for us to do this in partnership. Families and the school should do this in partnership, because a lot of these self-determination things are being worked on at home. So if a family is not on the same page as far as, what their goals are for their child, and making sure that if they don't want their child to be able to make those decisions on their own, then these efforts to work on self-determination are not going to be effective. So it's really important to start having a lot of conversation with families about self-determination and understand the family's perspective, because not every culture values this self-determination and some of these skills that I've talked about during this lecture. So it's just important to understand kind of where the family is coming from, so that you can determine a plan that both meets those families' goals, the students' goals, and helps the student to be able to achieve whatever long-term goals that they have in place for themselves. So what are some approaches to teaching this? So, using a student-driven IEP, involving the student in an IEP, directly teaching skills or enhancing the knowledge. So what can we do directly in the classroom to support a student being able to work on these skills? And then embedding instruction into the general ed curriculum. So you can see how a lot of these things would be helpful for all students. And then also person-centered planning. And this is a part of what can happen in an IEP meeting, is really just understanding it's a whole process. And I suggest you kind of Google it and look at some information on what this means. But you're bringing this whole team of people together that support this student, and you're talking to them about their strengths, what are they good at, and you're bringing in all this piece of information, but it's really centered on that particular student or person. And so the individual themselves is at the center of all this planning. So, student-driven IEPs. So, we talked earlier in this semester about students being capable of participating in their IEP. So, it just depends. Like, it's not going to look the same for every student. Different students are at different places, have different abilities to be able to do that at different times. But I'm a firm believer that all students are able to participate in their IEP at some level. And then we need to teach students about their special education process and their rights. So what accommodations and modifications can they ask for in the classroom? What goals are on their IEP? Making sure that they understand that. And, simply sometimes students don't even understand what their disability is and what that means. And so, knowing enough to step back and being able to teach the student kind of the background information they need in order to be successful. And then having students communicate details of their IEP and track goals about progress. So, involving them in the process, not just at the meeting, but all year round. Teaching directly, you can teach self-management, choice making, problem solving, and just having this at the forefront of all these discussions and interactions that you're having with students. And you can see how a lot of this is going to benefit all students in your classroom. So, making sure that they have the skills necessary in order to make the choices for themselves. So this is one example of a goal plan, for probably an elementary student. You can see here, the student can kind of do some thinking about what is their goal and what do they need to do to achieve a goal, and what will the outcomes be, and the people that can support them in order to reach their goal. So some practical examples, providing opportunities for students to make decisions, then helping students link their actions back to their outcomes, and assisting students in requesting academic and social supports from teachers, and really making students partners in communicating those IEP services and supports. So there's not a lot of curriculum that's available for self-determination, and a lot of school districts don't have a curriculum, but there are things out there, and there's more coming. There's a lot of research being done in this area about evidence-based practices and how effective they are to not only teaching self-determination to students with disabilities, but also for all students. So that's it for the self-determination lecture. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Have a good week.